Well, if you're a believer in analytics, this was great analytic basketball. They hit 49% on threes. And despite Denver dominating points in the paint, where they had a 54-32 advantage, they dominated twos. The threes won the game. In fact, I would argue when Miami was down about 8-9 late, I thought Denver waited way too long to shoot threes. It's like, guys, we got a minute 40 here. Threes only. And I mean, Denver can give you threes, and certainly wasn't bad from beyond the arc. But this is the way to win. You can see in terms of length, Denver's going to get points in the paint. Denver's just long, Gordon and Porter. But again, if Tyler Hero comes back and Duncan, you have elite three-point shooters. So this is Miami's way to do it. They're built for analytics. Their center, Bam Adebayo, runs the floor. They're a classic analytic team. They're the Warriors East. They're not real big. A lot of grit, a lot of culture, can play really good defense, especially situationally. And when they hit threes, they're hard to beat. They really remind me, I was thinking watching them, is that for years and years when I lived in Connecticut, I would watch New England, and I rarely thought they had top 2 or 3 talent. But I was always like, they're so much smarter than everybody. Well, we found out that they had the rare combination of a brilliant defensive mind and the great offensive mind in Brady. When Brady left, they don't look nearly as smart. But Miami, I always feel that. Like, why can't anybody else find Caleb Martin and Max Strus and Duncan Robinson? Like, why aren't these other teams doing that? The difference is when they're Tom Brady, Dwayne Wade left, they're still great. So it's more truly about the coach and the culture. Whereas, that goes against the grain. We think basketball is the player sport. Football is the coaching sport. But New England really was more about the player, Brady, than it was the coach. And I think Miami is more about the coach than the players, is that they won with Wade. They're winning with Butler. 7 undrafted guys, 4 are playing. So tonight, this was classic culture. This was classic analytics. We're not as big. We're going to surrender a lot of twos. We're going to shoot a lot of threes. And on this night, Miami looked like they had much better energy for a team that plays at sea level. That extra day off, they looked energized late. That extra day off really helped Miami.
I'm glad you brought up New England, because that's exactly where my brain went. There's the Belichick-ism, which is do your job. That, to me, is the embodiment of the way the Miami Heat play basketball. It's funny because a lot of times we talk about coverages and, they should do this coverage or they should do this one instead. And like every coverage in and of itself doesn't fail under its own, tactical approach. It fails under execution. So, for instance, one of the most criticized coverages in the NBA is drop coverage, because a lot of dribble pull-up shooters will get good looks as they're coming over the top. But if you do it right, like if the dude who's guarding the ball does his job and chases over the top, he'll funnel him to the big man, which allows the big man to stay in a position where he can guard the roll man and the ball handler. If it's done properly, it does work. The problem is 90% of the time it falls apart in execution. The guard dies on the screen, or the big man can't dissuade the lob pass, or whatever it is. Miami, and what's so fascinating to me is we saw the Lakers completely incapable of even making Denver work hard for baskets, which is wild considering how good they are defensively. They had a 122 offensive rating against the Lakers, which means they scored 122 points per 100 possessions. They had extended stretches, the Miami Heat did, of good defense against Denver tonight. They have found 2 different schematic approaches that allow them to get stops. One, moving Kevin Love into the lineup, allowing him to guard Aaron Gordon so that Jimmy Butler can guard Jamal Murray. And Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo guarding the Jokic-Murray action 2-on-2. So they don't have to send help, which is making it so Michael Porter Jr. is not getting those wide open threes that he's used to getting, so that KCP's not getting those wide open threes, so their rhythm's getting disrupted. And then the zone, which once again, the exact same sort of thing. Zone requires such fantastic execution to work, which is why most NBA teams don't use it. And Miami zone works against a team that it has no business working against, with that kind of shooting and with Jokic scoring from the high post. And you pointed out the 2 versus 3 thing, and that's a really interesting dynamic that took place down the stretch of this game. Jokic was scoring every damn time he caught it by the rim, but that was 2. And on the other end of the floor, Denver's guarding Miami's actions 3-on-2, so there's constant open looks on the backside that are worth 3. And the math was working very heavily in Miami's favor. They're doing the impossible. I watched what I thought that Laker team I thought was the best defense in this playoff field. Miami's doing a much better job guarding Denver than LA did. It's amazing to me. I'm blown away.
Well, and they also, what Miami did is Denver's only 3-7 this year in the 10 games where Jokic had fewer than 7 assists. So what they made Jokic was a scorer. All right. And by the way, he's a very good scorer. He's not a great scorer. He's not Jordan. He's not Kareem. He's not even Karl Malone. On a good Jokic night, you get about 23 points. And then you get 11 assists, 12 assists. Well, tonight he only had, I think, like 4 or 5 assists. So they made him just into a scorer. So, by the way, he was. And they were really trailing late. It felt like it was an 8-9. I mean, it closed at the end. It felt like Miami was in total control the last 5 minutes of the game, and he's dropping 40. So, I was watching Jokic, and I really like watching him play. He's such a pain in the butt to guard. If you'd never watched Larry Bird, if you were born, at the end of Larry Bird's reign, you'd never really seen him play, you would say he's like a forward. If Jokic was a forward, that's what he played like, because his passing is brilliant. But a big part of what made Larry Bird is one of those Bill Russell, LeBron Magic stars. Jokic is too, that they elevate others. So Magic could give you 42, but the secret sauce with Magic and LeBron is they make J.R. Smith viable as hell in an NBA Finals. Matthew Dellavedova can play. Like there was a time Tristan Thompson became valuable, in a finals. That's the secret sauce to Jokic. It's not the points. It's the elevation. He turns C+ guys into B players, B guys into B+ players. There were people that were just out on Jamal Murray, like after the ACL injury, and like he looks like one of the best players in the world. So I thought they reduced, it's a weird way to say it, they reduced Jokic to just a great scorer tonight, and Denver's not as effective. They're really not. He's going to dominate twos. They'll take their chances on that. And I will say this, though. What you're seeing is really good coaches. I saw so many people, because I watched game 1. I watched the full game YouTube highlights because I was overseas. And, the idea people were saying, oh, this series is over and I'm like, timeout. Miami just got out of a highly emotional 7-game series. They're going as a sea-level team to the mountains. They got no chance in game 1. They got no shot. It's like, everybody take a deep breath. This is a 6 or a 7-game series. I think Denver's better. They'll now adjust. But tonight, in that fourth quarter, it was analytic basketball, 3s versus 2s, and Miami, Spo, chess match, edge, Miami tonight.
Yeah, it's interesting because I fell for the same gambit that you're referring to, the series is over gambit. And, it's funny because it was just as much about Denver as it was about Miami. Like, I don't think people realize how dominant Denver has been to this point. They swept the Lakers. The Phoenix series went to 6, but did you know their average margin of victory in the wins was over 17 points in that series? Like, they kicked Phoenix's ass. Like, it wasn't close. So they killed Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, and then they killed LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Like that. That's why I'm so high on what Denver does. And then specifically, what was happening in the Eastern Conference was a lot of capitalizing on weaknesses, like Boston's weaknesses in offensive decision making. New York's, like literally Julius Randle kind of crumbled. Jalen Brunson was the only guy who looked comfortable. All their spot-up shooters went cold. Milwaukee obviously has a bunch of half-court offense issues. So it felt kind of like Spoelstra was like just capitalizing on major weaknesses. And then you look at this Denver team and you don't kind of see them as a team that has a weakness. But this is where the genius of leaving Jokic on an island comes into play. And you broke it down perfectly. The ideal Jokic game is 23 points per game, bunch of assists. That's when everyone's flowing. Rhythm is a real thing in basketball. If you leave a guy on an island and you stay home off the ball, then guys that are used to touching the basketball a certain number of times over the course of the game suddenly go extended stretches where they don't touch the basketball. And so then when KCP gets a wide open look off of a Jamal Murray handoff at the end of the game from the top of the key, he bricks it long because he hasn't been getting shots. He's barely been touching the basketball. And so that's the genius in it is Jokic is so damn good, he's going to get 40 on efficient shooting because that's how good he is. But if you make them play that style, it just puts everybody else out of rhythm. And there's one last thing I wanted to shout out. And actually, Colin, I think this is a really interesting kind of way to look at team building in the NBA. Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are the two stars of this Miami Heat team. They have taken on all of the dirty work. Like, it's crazy to me. They are completely and utterly bought in to doing all of the hard things that so many stars around the league don't do. Like, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo are what kind of shut down Denver's offense tonight. Like, that's crazy for your star, for Jimmy Butler, the guy who's been heliocentric, doing all the work offensively, to then just be like, I'm going to guard Jamal Murray and chase him over screens all night long. And I think it's a really good indicator when we look at team building moving forward. Like, you gotta, if your foundational players, and Eric Spoelstra said something to this effect after game one, I think, or before the finals. He's like, if your two best players don't want to defend, I don't know how you can build a good defense. And that's the truth. Like, you've got, they are built, it's not just the execution from the coaching staff. It's the stars and them being utterly bought into the dirty work. And then all those role players are naturally bought in because everybody above them is. And it just leads to that well-oiled machine.
You ever do any home projects, whether you're a renter or you're an owner? Listen, rent or own, there's a lot of stuff that needs fixing. And something my wife and I really believe in, you got to stay current. You don't want to just fix up when you're about to sell. You want to enjoy it. You want to live in the place. Fix it up when you move in. Angie has 220,000 pros available for you to do the job. It's part of their Angie network. The pros in your area have been rated and reviewed by others. So you know when you sign up the quality of work you're getting. Go to ANGI.com or download the free Angie mobile app today. Angie can help you get the best cost for your project. Angie, your home for everything home. Yeah, I mean, this has been something I've been on for years, is that Carmelo Anthony never wanted to defend. You can't build your franchise around a guy that won't defend. There's not a knock on Carmelo, but it's like Kevin Durant's a willing defender. So Steph Curry. He's just not a great defender. So they protect him with Draymond and Andre Iguodala in his prime off the bench and Klay Thompson, pre-injuries. You protect him. And that there's a handful of players, we do this in the NBA, we fall for the dynamic offensive player. And it's interesting. Years ago when I was a kid, I always used the example of World B. Free or George Gervin. They weren't classified as great players. World B. Free was this guy who averaged like 29 a game, 28 a game for I think it was the Sixers. He was an oddity. He had a crazy name, unique game. He was a gunner. He wasn't an all-star. It was okay just saying he's just a really fun offensive player. What's happened in basketball, we now give MVPs to guys like James Harden, who gives you no effort on the defensive end. James Harden's a great scorer. That's what we would have called him in the 70s and 80s. He's a great scorer. We don't really classify him as an MVP level player. And to your point is, it's hard to find, to me, an all-time great player, Kobe, MJ, that either was a great defensive player in his prime, Kareem, or was at least a willing defender, Steph, KD, willing defenders. John Stockton, Isaiah, they're willing defenders. I don't know if Isaiah was. Stockton was a willing defender. So to your point is, I always think about if I was Miami, there's a lot of things you could sell players on because they do practice, they work you. They really demand a lot of you. But it's such an easy sell. You can say, listen, guys, it's the best weather in the entire Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
The bluest water, no state tax, no chaos in the building. This is a great organization. What we're going to ask of you is to play your ass off on both ends. That's the ask. And I think Golden State's been able to do that. Like, we will outspend the salary cap. We don't care. New arena coming. We'll pay everybody. but you got to play on the defensive end. It's not about you. You just got to be, Greg Popovich once said, you got to get over yourself if you want to be part of a dynasty. At some point, you have to get over yourself. And this is not just a shot at Melo, but this idea that we just worship these, and I love the NBA, but we worship these players who just don't give you an effort on the defensive end. It just doesn't work. Those are non-championship players. They're fun. I loved World B. Free. I love George Gervin. You got to give me something. And when I watch Miami play, I'm like, if you told me somebody just dived on the floor for the Heat, I'd be like, what, Jimmy Butler? Larry Bird, by the way. I would guess, Larry Bird. I love that style of basketball. I really do.
I was literally thinking about that when I was watching Bam Adebayo in that fourth quarter and how I want to work on with my coverage of the league, doing a better job of crediting players who do that. Because I like Bam Adebayo is nowhere near as gifted as Anthony Davis. And he's, through 2 games, done such a better job on both ends of the floor. And a huge part of that is he's just fighting with more physicality in position battles, and he's sprinting his ass off up and down the floor every single possession. One of the biggest ways that Jokic killed Anthony Davis was just in transition, just running. And it's, again, it gives you the ability to demand perfection from the rest of the roster. I think about this a lot with the Last Dance and some of the stuff from Michael Jordan. And there's a huge movement, especially from LeBron fans, to try to paint Michael as this prick who just was just treating everybody awful. And it's like, I look at it completely differently. Michael demanded perfection from his teammates because he was in pursuit of that same thing on both ends of the floor. And so it carries more weight down the roster. You can ask a bunch of undrafted guys and guys that are that don't have the necessary level of athleticism and skill that your top players have. You can ask them to do a little job perfectly when Jimmy and Bam are not taking any possessions off and they're fighting through all that stuff. Again, like fundamentally, the two of them guarding Murray and Jokic changed the way that Denver was able to generate shots. And so I just think it's a super interesting thing to look at when we're looking at team development is you've got to have guys at the top that are willing to embrace the dirty work because that's the only thing that's going to allow you to demand from the rest of the roster. And you're like, you mentioned Miami bringing in players. Like that's the next thing out of all of this because I still believe Denver will win this series, although I've seen enough from tonight to know that Miami has a real chance, which I didn't think before tonight. However, like one of the big things to take away from this series if Denver does win is what if Miami got some players? Like what if they got some players? Because if they get some players in there with what Jimmy and Bam can do and with what Eric Spoelstra can do, that's where it gets really scary because they have all of the other odds and ends tied off so perfectly that they maximize talent so well that it could really be devastating for the rest of the league.
Yeah, and I think there's this natural let's get Dame down to Miami, but Dame doesn't. I mean, because Bam is a willing defender, Jimmy Butler's an excellent defender. Lowry's got limitations due to age. Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero are not going to defend. Adding another player that doesn't defend is not necessarily it. That's why, when I threw the name out with the Celtics, but I'll throw it out with Miami, Andrew Wiggins is a very interesting piece. A twitchy, willing defender doesn't need to be the leader. Could be the second or third best player on your team. Super smart, gets the intelligence of the Miami culture. That's the kind of guy, a willing wing defender. So you can have Tyler Hero on the floor, and it's not. And then I look at the Warriors, and I think, oh, what could you get? Well, they love to shoot, and so Miami, to your point, I think they could add a piece, but they don't need a flashy piece, right? They don't. The culture fit is somebody who is willing, doesn't need headlines, experienced, smart, and a guy that on the wing is a willing defender. So it's like, I'm not saying Andrew Wiggins is the piece, but we tend to go, oh, let's put this guy who jacks up. That's not really what Miami is. That's not their thing, man. Miami has done a really good job through the years of assessing what they are and also assessing what they're not. And I think I've always been told this in the broadcasting biz when you're building a network. like you have to know your own talent before you can go out and find talent. Like, who are our best pieces? And it's sometimes, I think ESPN went through a stretch where they didn't recognize some of their own pieces as they were trying to assemble, kind of as George Bodenheimer left, John Skipper came in, there was a sea change at the company, and I didn't think they assessed their own talent very well as they were trying to pursue other talent. And I think when I look at Miami, I think Miami totally understands what they are, gets sort of right now what they're not, what they need. Tyler Hero is not exactly a perfect fit for Miami. A little flaky, a little immature, not a defender, doesn't really fit. I could see them moving him. They're winning. They're in the finals without him. I could see them moving him and adding a little toughness and better wing defense. Then how good would Miami be? You had a 17-point-a-game wing guy that defends. Then what are they? How great have the NBA playoffs been so far? If you live in one of those cities and wanted to go to the games, there was only one place to get tickets: the Game Time app, the fastest growing ticketing app in the U.S. For last-minute, amazing deals. They don't stop with the NBA. They do baseball, hockey, concerts, comedy shows too. Download the Game Time app and use the code Colin, COLIN. Get $20 off your first purchase. $20 off first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Game Time app. Use the code Colin, COLIN. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. The Game Time app, the fastest growing sports app in the United States. Use the code Colin, COLIN.
Yeah, it's interesting because with Tyler Hero in particular, I think Spoelstra, and I'm not sure if he was actually ruled as available tonight or not, or if it was just like a DNP coach's decision. But like it is, our colleague Draymond Green actually did a really good job of breaking this down on his show. Just the general idea that like there's a rhythm and a flow to what Miami is doing right now. And to throw a new guy into that who has a lot of usage, meaning like he's going to control a lot of possessions, it just has a lot. We just have a lot of opportunity for that to bump the train off the track, so to speak. I do think that in the long run, like they will have to come up with some sort of secondary shot creator, and I think that's why they've been so hesitant to give up Tyler Hero over the years. But like you're right. I mean, regardless of whether it's Wiggins or it's a bigger fish, whoever that guy is has to be someone who's bought in. And for the record, this is something that I think Spoelstra's done a really good job of. And I should say Pat Riley too. They've been very picky about who they bring in. Have you noticed that? Like they know they can identify pretty on like, no, you're not about what we're about,
Lowry's a great example of what they're about.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you get the right guys, like the Heat culture thing has been said so many times, it's kind of lost some of its meaning. But there is a reality to it in the sense that it's kind of like that epic rant from MJ at the Last Dance. It's like, if this is not the way you want to play, go somewhere else, but this is the way we're going to play here. And that's kind of the Miami Heat ideology is it's like, if you come here, you're going to defend every possession like it's your last, because that's how we play. And guess what? It helps you beat better teams in the NBA playoffs. And that's why we do it. We're about winning trophies here. And I love that whole idea. So as we go into Miami, Miami's a 2-point underdog, by the way, at home.
I think they'll split. I think they'll split.
Think so?
It'll come back 2-2. Yeah, I think these teams, I think it's going to be a coaching chess match. I think Denver's better, but not significantly better. And they've never won this thing, and this is new territory. I thought tonight's Spo chess match, I thought Spo was worth 3 games in the Boston series. I thought he won tonight. I thought he did the tweaking late as Denver's offense dried up. So I don't think Spo's going to be worth 2 or 3 wins in this series because I think Malone's more than capable. I thought Mazzulla was a little over his head. I think Joe Mazzulla, it's a learning experience. It just happened to be on national TV. It's the worst place for one, but it is what it is. But I think Spo stole one tonight. And I think they'll go to Miami split and they'll come back, and that's exactly what this series is. I think Denver's going to eventually win close. Wouldn't be surprised if Miami won. I don't buy into the Miami is going to get overwhelmed. I think Denver's longer. They're going to get more free, cheap baskets. And by the way, when you live on that 3 like Miami did tonight, they're going to have longer droughts. Like Denver's fourth quarter was rare. I wrote some notes down tonight. Their droughts are a 6-0 run. They had 2 droughts. They started the game in a drought, and they ended the game in a drought. Like Denver really struggled early and really struggled late. So that's chess match. That's Spo's opening adjustments and closing adjustments. In the 80% of the game inside of that, Denver was the better team. But early and late, and that's coaching, right? Like if you go to NFL games, the opening drive, you score first in the NFL, you win 70% of your games. That was Bill Walsh. Take the lead. The opening drive in the NFL, and how do you close with 2 minutes left? That's coaching. That's the great coaches. Poorly coached teams never finish strong. Like over the course of an NFL season, poorly coached teams unravel late. It's like a golden rule. They just unravel late. So I thought Spo stole one tonight.
Yeah, as we move towards Miami, I kind of see it the same way. I could see a split there. There's going to be a couple of specific adjustments that I expect from Denver. One, they just have to defend better. Mike Malone's going to be all over them about their defensive effort in this particular game because it wasn't great. Jamal Murray in particular was biting at every single pump fake and giving up a ton of driving lanes that was leading them to be in rotation a lot. Offensively, I think they need to do a lot more Jokic stuff with KCP and Michael Porter Jr. to keep them in rhythm during the game while they're leaving Jokic on an island a lot. Sometimes they run too much two-man game with just Jamal Murray and Jokic, and then it'll be a Jokic post-up, Jokic post-up, Jokic post-up, and then it'll be Murray, Jokic. And like one of the ways to keep KCP and Michael Porter Jr. in rhythm is just to give them more touches throughout the game in dribble handoff situations. Before we get out of here, I did want to ask you one thing, though. So I thought Jokic was unbelievable tonight. Just absolutely unbelievable. Where do you... Our guy Carson from Nerd Sesh tweeted this out, and it got me thinking. He said it's a tier 1 playoff run of all time, meaning he views it on the same level as all the all-time great playoff runs from the all-time great players. I tend to agree, and I wanted to ask you, just because you have so much more experience watching the NBA over the years, does this feel like all-time great Pantheon-level stuff that we're seeing from Nikola Jokic to you?
Well, I think his consistency. I mean, people forget, it's like Michael Jordan. You never see the bad games. Michael had some really tough shooting matchups against the Utah Jazz in those finals, more than one. Michael had bad games. He had a bad one against, I think, Phoenix. He had a couple bad ones against, I think, Seattle in a closeout game. Michael wasn't perfect. I think with Jokic, it's the consistency. I feel like you can just write down, like tonight he had very few assists. You can just write down 24, 11, 12. Like that's rare. The consistency. I think what it's very like you could probably, I don't have Bill Russell's numbers obviously in front of me, but I feel like with Bill Russell, you would get the same defense every night when they were playing and winning the championships. It was, Bill could run the floor, Bill gave you defense, Bill probably gave you 18 to 20 points. Had I watched Bill Russell, I feel like that would be Jokic. Like I knew exactly what I was getting. Magic Johnson would have great nights, and then Kareem would score, and Magic would be back. So LeBron, to me, feels like even different than Michael. LeBron won a decade. I didn't think he had a bad playoff game. I remember when Dan Gilbert, I think I told you this once, when he left Cleveland and they said Dan Gilbert claimed that LeBron quit in a playoff game against like Boston, and the numbers were like 32, 11, 12. I'm like, oh, that's his quit game. Okay, I get it. Like LeBron to me is even greater than Michael in terms of it's hard to find in his prime an off night in the playoffs. I mean, they're all good. So I don't think it rises to that. But I do think there's a consistency to his game, and I think a lot of it is because he's such an elevator of others. Because of his size, almost 7 feet, he's going to get rebounds. Because of his girth and his body, he's going to give you 24 a night. Even if he doesn't play brilliantly, he just gets points. Tonight, they reduced him to just a score. He generally gives you 10, 11 assists. You can almost just bank it Like, you kind of know what you're getting, and that's kind of a Bill Russell, LeBron thing. Now, again, I'm not knocking Michael. Michael mostly gave you that. But Michael was never a great long-distance shooter. Michael had 2 great years shooting the 3. That's when they moved it in. Then they moved it out, and Michael went back to not being able to hit 3s. So I don't consider all-time stuff. It's funny listening to Denver complain about their media coverage, and I'm like, would you guys win a title first? I mean, they spent this whole thing. They're so upset with how they're being treated. It's like, do you guys have a ring? Like, you have 1 win in the finals. Like, Denver's a really good team. Let's wait before we call them great. Let's wait before we call Jokic great. It's a very, very impressive playoff run. They're tied. They just lost at home, right? Miami now has home court advantage. Nobody's disrespecting you. There's nothing. I don't have any trophies to talk about. The Bucks have a trophy. Dirk got a trophy. You don't have anything yet.
Oh, and as soon as you become a champion, our entire industry gives you so much more margin for error or leeway. And it's like the Lakers have been a dumpster fire basically for for 3 seasons. And every time there's a playoff run, it's like, watch out for the Lakers. Here they come. Because it's like you just earn that cachet. Same thing with the Bucks. The Bucks have been pretty mediocre ever since they won the title in 2021. But guess what? If they're healthy in the playoffs next year, you're going to be like, watch out for the Bucks. Like Denver, you got to earn that specific level of respect. I like the way you broke down the Jokic thing. The consistency, I think, is really important on the offensive end in particular. I do think that's what makes LeBron the most consistently great playoff player that I've ever seen. He's consistently great offensively and consistently great defensively. Michael was prone to cold shooting nights. Jokic can have his defensive shortcomings. And if I was being really nitpicky, because I do think that this is a very, very good playoff run from the standpoint of, like, anytime you run through KD and Devin Booker and then run through LeBron James and Anthony Davis and then win a championship, should he be able to, that's an incredibly impressive accomplishment. But, like, Jokic was not very good defensively tonight. And specifically, them having to bring him out on ball screens because he can't protect the rim, forcing Aaron Gordon to help on every single possession, leading to all these backs. Like, that's part of why they lost. Like, Jokic's defensive shortcomings are real. And I do think that, especially as we look forward in their careers, because you know how this works, especially with the new CBA. If KCP is going to be this good and Michael Porter Jr. is going to be this good and Jamal Murray is going to be this good and Aaron Gordon's going to be this good, you got to pay all those guys. They're about to run into this with Bruce Brown this summer. And then what ends up happening is suddenly you start have to pinch some pennies on specific role player positions. Now you got to go in with maybe a guy who's a really good defender but can't shoot the ball or can't finish around the rim in drop-off situations. Suddenly those weaknesses get a little bit more exposed. So I don't want to, I'm with you. Like, we'll evaluate it when they get the trophy, if they get the trophy. But yes, there's another element to this. I will say, though, in terms of just the offensive end, this has been an all-time great offensive playoff run from Nikola Jokic.